Texas, 1875. The unforgiving summer sun beat down on the drought-stricken plains of the Lone Star State, where outlaws roamed free, and the line between justice and vengeance blurred like mirages on the horizon. It was a land where a man lived by the sweat on his brow and the quickness of his draw, a place Xavier had come to believe held no room for tender emotions like love or trust. Isaac wiped his brow with a bandana as he surveyed the barren landscape from atop his chestnut gelding. At 25, he had already seen more violence than most men twice his age. His lean frame and broad shoulders spoke of strength earned through hard work, while his clean-shaven face and deep blue eyes belied a youthfulness that the frontier had tried its best to weather away. A few weeks' worth of light stubble shadowed his strong jawline, the only concession to the weeks spent on the trail. Thinking about turning back, Xavier, called Jeremiah Collins, the oldest of their small band of cowboys turned bounty hunters. "Not a chance," Isaac replied, squinting against the glare. "Those Blackwater boys have a date with justice after what they did in Cottonwood Springs." But the truth was, Isaac wasn't chasing outlaws just for justice. He was running from something too, the emptiness that had hollowed him out since he'd watched his family's homestead burn to the ground 3 years prior. He had learned the brutal lesson that day: caring for others was a liability on the frontier. Love was a luxury that got people killed. Better to remain detached, focused on survival, and keep moving. "The frontier ain't built for sentimentality," his father had told him before dying. "It's built for men who can stand alone against whatever comes." Isaac had taken those words to heart, forging himself into exactly that kind of man: solitary, self-sufficient, and emotionally impenetrable. What Isaac thought he wanted was simple: track down the Blackwater boys, collect the bounty, and move on to the next job. It was a life of purpose without attachment, of justice without vulnerability. What he didn't realize, what he couldn't possibly know as he urged his horse forward into the heat-shimmered distance, was that what he truly needed was precisely what he was running from. "Town up ahead," called Jeremiah, pointing to a cluster of buildings that had appeared on the horizon. "Riverton, small place, might be our chance to get some information." Isaac nodded. "And a drink that ain't warm water or whiskey that tastes like horse liniment." The four-man posse rode into Riverton just as the afternoon began its slow surrender to evening. It was a town like dozens of others Isaac had passed through, a main street lined with false-fronted buildings, a saloon doing steady business despite the early hour, and locals who regarded newcomers with equal parts curiosity and suspicion. They hitched their horses outside the Riverton saloon, dust coating their clothes and fatigue weighing on their shoulders. Isaac was last to dismount, his eyes methodically scanning the street for anything out of place. That's when he saw her. She stood on the boardwalk outside the general store, struggling with several parcels while trying to keep her pale blue dress from dragging in the dirt street. Her hair, the color of rich honey, was partially contained in a practical but becoming updo, with wayward strands framing a face that stopped Isaac in his tracks. She couldn't have been more than 20 years old, and there was something about her determined expression as she battled with her packages that made his chest tighten unexpectedly. "You coming, Xavier?" Jeremiah called from the saloon doors. "Go ahead," Isaac replied, surprising himself. "I'll be there in a minute." Before he could question his own actions, Isaac found himself crossing the street. The young woman had just dropped a small paper-wrapped package, and it landed dangerously close to a muddy puddle, one of the few remaining after weeks without rain. "Allow me, miss," Isaac said, quickly retrieving the package before it could be soiled. When she looked up, Isaac found himself staring into eyes the color of a summer sky. Something shifted inside him, subtle but undeniable. "Thank you, sir," she said, her voice carrying a hint of an Eastern accent. "Most gentlemen in this town would have just watched me struggle." "I'm not from this town," Isaac replied with a half-smile, "and my mother would haunt me from the grave if I ignored a lady in distress." "Then I'm grateful to your mother's influence," she said, returning his smile. "I'm Tessa Anderson, new to Riverton." "Isaac Xavier," he replied, tipping his hat, "just passing through." As he helped her gather the remaining packages, their hands brushed briefly. Isaac felt an unfamiliar jolt that had nothing to do with the dry heat or trail fatigue. "Passing through chasing outlaws, if I had to guess," Tessa said shrewdly, looking him over. "You have that determined look about you. Plus the gun on your hip isn't for show." Isaac's expression hardened slightly. "You're observant, Miss Anderson." "When you're a woman alone in the West, observation keeps you alive," she replied simply. "The Blackwater boys, is it?" "They came through here 3 days ago." Isaac's attention sharpened instantly. How did you? Like I said, I observed, Tessa interrupted. They weren't subtle, spent money freely at the saloon, bragged about some job they'd pulled in Cottonwood Springs. Left heading northwest toward the McAllister Creek. Isaac studied her face, searching for deception but finding none. That's valuable information, Miss Anderson. Valuable enough to help me get these packages to the schoolhouse, she asked with a small, knowing smile. Against every instinct of the past 3 years, Isaac found himself nodding. Lead the way. As they walked side by side down Riverton's main street, Isaac couldn't shake the feeling that something fundamental had just changed, like the first raindrop before a storm that breaks a long drought. The thought should have unsettled him, but instead he found himself asking questions, genuinely curious about the young woman beside him. The schoolhouse, you're the teacher. Tessa nodded, her honey-colored hair catching the late afternoon light. Just arrived from Boston last month. Riverton needed a teacher and I needed, she paused, a fresh start. There was a story there. Isaac could hear it in the slight hesitation, see it in the momentary shadow that crossed her face. Against his better judgment, he wanted to know more. Boston to Riverton is quite a change, he observed. Most Eastern folks I meet can't wait to head back once they've had a taste of frontier life. I'm not most Eastern folks, Tessa replied with quiet determination. And I don't believe in going backward. When they reached the small, whitewashed building that served as Riverton's schoolhouse, Isaac helped Tessa arrange her packages inside. The single-room school was meticulously organized, with a dozen or so desks arranged in neat rows and educational charts covering the walls. You've made this place your own, Isaac commented, noting the vase of wildflowers on her desk and the collection of books that clearly weren't standard school texts. I believe learning should happen in a place that feels alive, she said, her passion evident as she straightened a crooked chart. These children have enough harshness in their lives without coming to a sterile, unwelcoming classroom. Isaac found himself staring at her longer than propriety allowed. There was something about Tessa Anderson that contradicted everything he thought he knew about the frontier. She was creating beauty in a place that seemed designed to crush it. I should get back to my men, he said finally, reluctantly. We'll be heading out at first light to follow the trail you mentioned. Tessa looked up at him, her expression suddenly serious. The Blackwater Boys aren't meant to be taken lightly, Mr. Xavier. They left a trail of stories behind them, ugly ones. Neither am I, Isaac replied, his voice hardening. And they'll answer for those stories. Tessa hesitated, then surprised him by briefly touching his arm. Be careful, the West has enough graves already. That simple touch, the genuine concern in her eyes, it blindsided Isaac more effectively than any outlaw's ambush could have. When was the last time someone had worried about his safety? When had anyone looked at him and seen a man worth coming back alive, not just a hired gun? I always am, Miss Anderson, he said, his voice softer than intended. Thank you for the information and the company. As Isaac walked back toward the saloon, he tried to shake off the encounter, to return to the singular focus that had driven him for years. But Tessa Anderson had awakened something he'd thought long buried, a reminder that there might be more to life than revenge and solitary wandering. Inside the saloon, his companions were already deep into their cups and local gossip. Jeremiah waved him over to their table. Where'd you disappear to? The older man asked, pushing a whiskey toward Isaac. Getting information, Isaac replied, not entirely untruthfully. The Blackwater Boys were here 3 days ago. Headed northwest toward McAllister Creek. How'd you figure that out while we've been working the saloon with no luck? Asked Samson, the youngest of their group. Isaac shrugged. Sometimes you just have to ask the right person. That night, as Isaac lay on his rented bed in the town's small hotel, sleep eluded him. His mind kept returning to Tessa Anderson, to her sky-blue eyes and the way she spoke about her students with such care. He told himself it was nothing but a momentary distraction, that by tomorrow he'd be back on the trail with the single-minded purpose that had defined him since losing his family. But even as he finally drifted into sleep, a treacherous part of him wondered what it might be like to return to Riverton when their hunt was done, just to see if the schoolteacher was making out all right in her new home. Just to hear her voice once more. Morning came with merciless brightness. The posse was mounted and ready to ride as the sun crested the eastern horizon, casting long shadows down Riverton's main street. Isaac adjusted his hat, mentally calculating distances and travel times to McAllister Creek, when movement on the boardwalk caught his eye. Tessa Anderson stood outside the general store, a small package in her hands. When their eyes met, she walked toward him with purpose. "For the trail," she said simply, handing him the package. "Biscuits and jerky, the kind that won't break your teeth." Isaac took the package, acutely aware of his companion's curious stares. "That's mighty kind, Miss Anderson." "Good hunting, Mr. Xavier," she said quietly, "and better returning." Before he could respond, she turned and walked away, her blue skirt swishing around her ankles. Isaac tucked the package into his saddlebag, ignoring Jeremiah's knowing smirk and Samson's poorly concealed elbow jab to their fourth companion, Henry. "Not a word," Isaac warned as they rode out of town, but there was less edge to his voice than usual. "Wouldn't dream of it," Jeremiah replied, though his eyes twinkled with mischief. "Not every day a pretty schoolmarm takes a shine to our Isaac." "She was just being neighborly," Isaac insisted, but even to his own ears the words rang hollow. The trail northwest was harsh and unforgiving. The landscape grew increasingly rugged as they approached the foothills that would eventually rise into mountains. Water became scarcer, the sun more punishing. But for the first time in years, Isaac found his thoughts wandering from the task at hand. Each night as they made camp, he would take one of Tessa's biscuits from the carefully wrapped package, rationing them like precious cargo. On the third day out from Riverton, they found the first definitive sign of their quarry, a campsite hastily abandoned, still warm enough that the Blackwater Boys couldn't be more than a few hours ahead. "We'll catch them by nightfall if we push hard," Jeremiah said, examining a discarded cigarette butt. Isaac nodded, a familiar cold determination settling over him. This was what he was good at: the hunt, the pursuit of justice. Not soft thoughts about schoolteachers with honey-colored hair and eyes that reminded him of clearer skies. Yet even as they mounted up to continue the chase, Isaac found himself touching the last biscuit in his saddlebag, a tangible reminder that somewhere, someone might be wondering if he would make it back alive. The confrontation, when it came, erupted with the sudden violence that characterized most frontier justice. The Blackwater Boys had made camp in a small canyon, believing themselves safe. They hadn't counted on Isaac's tracking skills or the determination of men who had ridden for weeks with a single purpose. Gunfire echoed off the canyon walls as the outlaws scrambled for cover. Isaac took a position behind a large boulder, his Winchester rifle steady in his hands. He had done this before too many times to count. Usually the icy calm of combat settled over him like a familiar cloak. But today something was different. Each shot he fired came with a new awareness of what was at stake, not just justice, but his own future. "Xavier, on your left," Jeremiah shouted. Isaac pivoted just in time to see one of the Blackwater Boys flanking their position. His shot caught the man in the shoulder, spinning him around. As the outlaw fell, Isaac recognized him as Luke Blackwater himself, the leader of the gang and the man most responsible for the violence in Cottonwood Springs. The firefight intensified. Henry took a bullet to the leg, crying out as he fell behind their makeshift barricade. Samson moved to help him while Jeremiah provided covering fire. Isaac seized the moment to advance, moving quickly from cover to cover until he had a clear shot at the remaining outlaws. "It's over, Blackwater," he called out. "Throw down your weapons or the next shots won't be warnings." What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Luke Blackwater rose from behind a fallen tree, gun raised and a murderous gleam in his eye. Isaac saw the outlaw's finger tighten on the trigger, knew that either he or one of his companions was about to die. He fired first, his bullet finding its mark with deadly accuracy. As Blackwater fell, his remaining men surrendered, throwing their weapons into the dirt with curses and pleas for mercy. The fight was over almost as quickly as it had begun, leaving behind the acrid smell of gunpowder and the groans of the wounded. Isaac approached Luke Blackwater's body, feeling strangely hollow. This was what he had wanted, the man responsible for so much suffering brought to justice. Yet the victory tasted ashen in his mouth. For the first time, he wondered what Tessa would think of this moment of him standing over a dead man with smoking gun in hand. "We got them, Xavier," Jeremiah said, coming up beside him. "It's done." "Henry?" Isaac asked. "He'll live." Bullet went clean through. Samson's patching him up now. Isaac nodded, holstering his weapon. "We'll make camp here tonight. Head back to Riverton in the morning. The sheriff there can arrange transport for the prisoners to the county seat." If Jeremiah noticed that Isaac had chosen Riverton rather than the closer town of Copper Creek, he didn't comment on it. But there was a knowing look in the older man's eyes that said plenty. That night, as they sat around the campfire with their bound prisoners under watch, Isaac took out Tessa's last biscuit. He had been saving it, though he hadn't admitted that to himself until now. Breaking it in half, he stared into the flames and allowed himself to imagine a different life, one where he wasn't always moving on, always hunting the next bounty. A life where perhaps a schoolhouse and a woman with sky-blue eyes featured prominently. "You're thinking about her," Jeremiah said quietly, settling beside him. It wasn't a question. Isaac didn't deny it. "Doesn't make sense, does it? Known her all of a few hours." "The heart ain't much for making sense," the older man replied. "Sometimes it knows in a moment what the head would take years to figure out." "My father always said the frontier was no place for sentiment," Isaac said. "That caring for others was just creating a weakness outlaws could exploit." Jeremiah was silent for a long moment. "Your father lost your mother and two sisters to frontier violence. Can't blame him for wanting to protect what he had left, but a man can survive alone, sure. Question is that really living?" The words stayed with Isaac through the night and into the next day as they began the journey back to Riverton. Henry was propped on his horse, pale but determined, while the three surviving Blackwater boys were bound and mounted on their own horses, lead ropes secured to the cowboys' saddles. They made slower progress with the wounded and prisoners, turning what had been a 3-day ride into nearly 5. With each passing mile, Isaac found his thoughts increasingly dominated by the schoolteacher. Would she still be there? Would she remember him? Had their brief encounter meant anything to her, or was he building castles in the dust of the trail? It was late afternoon when they finally rode into Riverton. The town appeared much as they had left it, though Isaac's eyes immediately sought out the schoolhouse at the end of the main street. Smoke rose from its small chimney, a promising sign of occupancy. "Take the prisoners to the sheriff," Isaac instructed Jeremiah and Samson. "Get Henry to the doctor. I'll join you shortly." Without waiting for a response, Isaac urged his horse toward the schoolhouse. As he approached, he could hear the sound of children's voices reciting in unison, a rhythmic cadence of learning that seemed incongruously civilized in this rough-edged town. He dismounted, suddenly unsure of himself. What was he doing? He was trail-worn and blood-spattered, hardly presentable company for a refined Eastern schoolteacher. Yet before he could reconsider, the schoolhouse door opened and children began pouring out, their school day concluded. They regarded him with curious stares as they passed, a few of the braver ones offering hesitant greetings to the dusty stranger. And then, framed in the doorway, stood Tessa Anderson. Her hair was pinned up as before, though a few more strands had escaped to frame her face. She wore a simple dress of deep green today, practical but becoming. When she saw Isaac, her eyes widened and something like relief washed over her features. "Mr. Xavier," she said, her voice carrying across the short distance between them, "you're back." Isaac removed his hat, suddenly conscious of his appearance. "Miss Anderson, I hope I'm not interrupting." "Not at all. School is finished for the day." She stepped out onto the small porch, her eyes taking in his trail-worn state. "You found them, I take it." "We did," Isaac confirmed. "They're at the sheriff's office now." "Those that survived." A shadow crossed Tessa's face, but she nodded in understanding. "And your men?" "All safe. Henry took a bullet to the leg, but he'll recover. The others are unharmed." An awkward silence fell between them. Isaac shifted his weight, acutely aware that he had no reason to be standing here, no information to gather, no assistance to offer. Nothing but a pull he couldn't explain and didn't want to resist. "I saved your last biscuit until last night," he finally said, the words sounding ridiculous to his own ears. To his surprise, Tessa smiled. "They were meant to bring you back safely. It seems they worked." "Would you," Isaac hesitated, then pressed on, "would you allow me to thank you properly, perhaps dinner at the hotel restaurant this evening? Once I've had a chance to make myself presentable." Tessa regarded him steadily, and for a moment Isaac feared he had overstepped, but then she nodded, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. "I would like that, Mr. Xavier." 7 o'clock. 7 it is, he agreed, a smile breaking across his face that felt foreign after so long. Isaac returned to the sheriff's office with a lightness in his step that hadn't been there in years. The business of the Blackwater Boys was concluded quickly, statements given, rewards claimed, arrangements made for transport to the territorial court. Throughout it all, Isaac found himself watching the clock, counting the hours until evening. At precisely 7 o'clock, freshly bathed, shaved, and dressed in the one decent outfit he carried in his saddlebags, Isaac waited in the hotel lobby. When Tessa entered, wearing a dress of pale blue that matched her eyes and with her honey-colored hair arranged in an elegant style, conversation in the lobby momentarily ceased. Miss Anderson, Isaac said, offering his arm, you look beautiful. Thank you, Mr. Xavier, she replied, taking his arm. You clean up rather well yourself. The hotel restaurant was the finest establishment in Riverton, which wasn't saying much, but they had made an effort with white tablecloths and decent china. As they settled at a table by the window, Isaac found himself uncharacteristically nervous. I'm not much for conversation, he admitted. The trail doesn't require it. Then perhaps I can help, Tessa suggested gently. Tell me about your family, Mr. Xavier. It was precisely the question Isaac would normally avoid, yet with Tessa, the usual walls didn't rise up. Instead, he found himself speaking of his parents' homestead in eastern Colorado, of his sister's laughter, of the day 3 years ago when he returned from a cattle drive to find nothing but ashes and graves. After that I couldn't stay, he explained, his voice low. Took to bounty hunting, it seemed fitting, bringing justice to those who destroy lives. Tessa's hand reached across the table to rest lightly on his. And has it brought you peace? The question struck him like a physical blow. No, he admitted, the truth of it suddenly clear. No, it hasn't. What would, she asked softly. Isaac looked up, meeting her eyes. I'm beginning to wonder if I've been asking the wrong questions all along. As the evening progressed, Isaac found himself sharing more than he had with anyone in years. In turn, Tessa told him of her life in Boston, of losing her parents to influenza and finding herself alone at 20, her teaching credentials her only asset. She spoke of answering Riverton's advertisement for a teacher, of the journey west, and of her determination to build something meaningful in this dusty frontier town. Most people come west running from something, Isaac observed. But you seem to be running toward something instead. Tessa smiled, a hint of sadness in her eyes. Perhaps both. Boston held too many ghosts, but I also believe there's something powerful in building rather than merely surviving. That's what I hope to do here, build something lasting. By the time they finished their meal, the restaurant had emptied around them. Isaac walked Tessa to her small house adjacent to the schoolhouse, their conversation flowing with surprising ease. Will you be leaving soon? Tessa asked as they reached her door, the question casual but her eyes betraying deeper interest. Isaac hesitated. The normal pattern would be to collect the bounty, perhaps celebrate for a night, and then move on to the next job, the next town. But standing there in the soft glow of lamplight from Tessa's window, that life suddenly seemed hollow. I'm not sure, he admitted. My men will be moving on once Henry can ride. But I find myself thinking Riverton might be worth getting to know better. The smile that bloomed across Tessa's face sent a warmth through Isaac that had nothing to do with the mild evening air. Then perhaps you might consider attending our town social this Saturday, as my guest. I'd be honored, Isaac replied, surprised by how much he meant it. As he walked back to the hotel, Isaac tried to make sense of the emotions swirling within him. One brief encounter with Tessa Anderson had somehow shifted his entire perspective. The thought should have terrified him, this vulnerability, this opening to potential loss. Instead, he felt something like hope taking root, foreign but not unwelcome. The next few days passed in a blur of new experiences. Isaac found reasons to remain in Riverton while his companions prepared to depart. He helped repair the schoolhouse roof, split firewood for Tessa's winter supply, and even, to the amusement of the townspeople, sat in on a school lesson about geography, offering first-hand accounts of places he'd traveled. Each evening, he and Tessa would walk together, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes simply enjoying the comfortable silence between them. Isaac learned that Tessa was 20 years old, that she loved poetry but had a practical mind for mathematics, that she believed fiercely in education as the key to a better future for the frontier. In turn, he found himself sharing parts of himself he'd kept locked away for years, his dreams before tragedy struck, his skill with horses, his secret enjoyment of the adventure novels that occasionally made their way to remote trading posts. By the time Saturday arrived, Isaac could no longer deny the truth. He was falling for Tessa Anderson, falling in a way that defied his every conviction about life on the frontier, and more surprising still, he didn't want to stop it. The town social was held in the community hall, a large open building decorated with paper lanterns and wildflowers. A small band played lively tunes as couples danced and townsfolk visited over punch and homemade cookies. Isaac, dressed in his best, felt conspicuous among the farmers and merchants, his gun belt absent but the calluses on his trigger finger still visible. You look like you're facing a firing squad rather than a dance, Tessa teased as she approached, looking radiant in a dress of deep rose that must have been saved for special occasions. Outlaws, I understand, Isaac admitted with a rueful smile. Dancing is another matter entirely. Then it's fortunate I'm an excellent teacher, she replied, taking his hand and leading him toward the dance floor. As they joined the other couples, Isaac's initial stiffness gradually gave way to enjoyment. Tessa was indeed a good teacher, guiding him through the steps with gentle pressure and encouraging smiles. By the third dance, he had relaxed enough to actually look around, noticing the approving glances from the townsfolk. They've taken a liking to you, Tessa observed, following his gaze. Word of what you did, bringing the Blackwater Boys to justice, has spread. Those men terrorized more towns than just Cottonwood Springs. I was just doing a job, Isaac demurred. Perhaps, but it matters to these people. They sleep easier knowing men like you are out there. The compliment warmed him, but also stirred an unexpected pang. Men like him, drifters, bounty hunters, men who lived by the gun. Was that all he was, all he could be? As if reading his thoughts, Tessa added softly, though I wonder if the man I'm coming to know is more than just his profession. Before Isaac could respond, a commotion at the entrance drew everyone's attention. A man staggered in, clothes torn and face bloody. Raiders, he gasped. Coming this way, the Carson gang burned the Wilkins place heading to town. The social dissolved into chaos as men rushed to gather weapons and women hurried children toward safety. Isaac immediately sought out the sheriff, finding him organizing the town's defense. Xavier, the sheriff acknowledged grimly, could use your expertise about now. Carson's got at least 10 men from what we hear. Town's only got a handful who can shoot straight. I'll help, Isaac said without hesitation. Get the women and children to the stone building, the bank, best fortification in town. As Isaac helped coordinate the town's defense, his eyes kept seeking out Tessa amid the confusion. He finally spotted her gathering her students, calmly directing them toward the bank while reassuring frightened parents. Miss Anderson, he called, making his way to her side, get inside with the others. I will, she promised. Once all the children are accounted for, her eyes met his, fear present but overshadowed by determination. Be careful, Isaac. It was the first time she had used his given name. The intimacy of it, even amid the chaos, sent a surge of emotion through him. I will, he echoed. This town has given me a reason to be. The Carson gang arrived with the setting sun, a line of riders silhouetted against the darkening sky. Isaac and the town defenders had positioned themselves strategically, some in the upper floors of buildings, others behind barricades hastily erected in the streets. The battle erupted with shocking violence. Carson's men charged into town shooting wildly, clearly expecting little resistance. They were met instead with coordinated fire from multiple positions. 2 raiders fell immediately, but the others quickly sought cover and returned fire with more precision. Isaac found himself alongside the sheriff behind an overturned wagon, exchanging shots with raiders who had taken position in the livery stable. They're trying to flank us, Isaac warned, spotting movement along the side streets. We need to. His words were cut off by the sheriff's cry of pain as a bullet found its mark in the man's shoulder, spinning him back against the wagon. Get to the bank, Isaac ordered one of the townsmen nearby. Tell them the sheriff's down and the south side needs reinforcing. As the man ran to deliver the message, Isaac turned his attention back to the battle. The raiders were pressing harder now, sensing weakness. A stray bullet shattered a lantern near the general store and flames quickly began to spread. Fire, someone shouted, and several defenders broke position to combat the blaze, leaving dangerous gaps in the town's defense. Isaac knew they were losing control of the situation. The raiders would soon realize the town's vulnerability and press their advantage. He needed to change the dynamic of the fight. With a quick instruction to the remaining men to cover him, Isaac worked his way around the buildings until he had a clear view of what appeared to be the raiders' leader. A tall man with a distinctive red bandana who was directing the others from behind a water trough. Taking careful aim, Isaac fired. The leader jerked backward, clutching his arm, and chaos erupted among the raiders as they realized their commander was hit. In the confusion, Isaac signaled the defenders to advance, and they began pressing forward, driving the disorganized raiders back toward the edge of town. The tide had turned, but the danger wasn't past. As Isaac moved to join the advancing townsmen, a movement caught his eye, a raider he hadn't spotted before, taking aim not at the defenders but toward the bank where the women and children had taken shelter, where Tessa was. Without thinking, Isaac broke from cover, firing as he ran. His shot went wide, but it was enough to draw the raiders' attention. The man swung his rifle toward Isaac just as Isaac realized he had emptied his revolver. Time seemed to slow. Isaac saw the raider's finger tighten on the trigger, saw the muzzle aimed squarely at his chest, knew with terrible clarity that he had no cover, no weapon ready, no chance to dodge. The shot came, but from a different direction. The raider crumpled as one of the townsmen, a quiet shopkeeper Isaac had barely noticed before, lowered his smoking rifle with a grim nod. "Reckon we're about even," the man said. "You saved our town, I saved you." The remaining raiders, seeing their advantage lost and their leader wounded, began a disorganized retreat. Within minutes, the only sounds were the groans of the wounded and the crackling of the fire, which the townspeople were already working to contain. As dawn broke over Riverton, the full tally became clear: 3 townsmen dead, several wounded including the sheriff, but the town had been saved. The Carson gang had been driven off with heavy losses, unlikely to return to a place that had shown such fierce resistance. Isaac found Tessa at the schoolhouse, which had been converted to a temporary infirmary. She moved among the wounded, offering water and comfort, her dress stained with blood but her movements sure and calm. When she saw Isaac, she set down her water pitcher and crossed to him immediately. Without a word, she wrapped her arms around him, holding him tightly as if to reassure herself he was truly alive. "I saw what happened," she whispered against his chest. "I thought I'd lost you before I ever truly had you." Isaac's arms encircled her, his cheek resting against her hair. In that moment, with the smell of gunpowder still in the air and the sounds of the wounded around them, clarity washed over him like a cleansing rain. "I've been a fool," he said softly, "thinking the only way to honor what I've lost was to keep moving, keep fighting. But there's more courage in staying, in building something that might be lost, than in never risking at all." Tessa drew back slightly, looking up at him with eyes that held no judgment, only understanding. "And is that what you want now, to stay, to build?" "If you'll have me," Isaac replied, the words both a question and a promise. Her answer was in her eyes, in the gentle pressure of her hand against his cheek, in the soft smile that bloomed across her face. "I believe Riverton could use a man with your skills, and I could use a partner who understands what it means to lose everything and still find the courage to begin again." 3 months later, Isaac stood on the porch of the small house he had built adjacent to Tessa's schoolhouse, watching the winter sun cast long shadows across the newly fallen snow. Inside, Tessa was preparing dinner, the domestic sounds a comforting backdrop to his thoughts. He had traded his bounty hunter's life for that of Riverton's deputy sheriff, a position that allowed him to use his skills while remaining rooted in one place. The townspeople had accepted him readily, especially after the raid, treating him not as a dangerous drifter but as one of their own. And Tessa had become the center of his world in a way he would never have believed possible that day he rode into town pursuing outlaws. Their courtship had progressed with a speed that scandalized some of the older town ladies, but seemed perfectly natural to them both. "When you know," Jeremiah had said, and now Isaac understood what the old cowboy had meant. The sound of approaching hooves drew his attention. A single rider came down the road, and Isaac recognized the familiar silhouette of Jeremiah Collins. "Thought you might have moved on to warmer climes for the winter," Isaac called as his old friend dismounted. "And miss your wedding? Not likely," Jeremiah replied with a grin. "Samson and Henry send their regrets, got caught up in some business down El Paso way, but they sent gifts." Isaac clasped the older man's hand warmly. "I'm glad you made it. Wouldn't be right without you standing up with me." "Never thought I'd see the day," Jeremiah commented, looking around at the neat house and yard. Isaac Xavier settling down. "And to a schoolmarm, no less." "Life takes unexpected turns," Isaac replied with a smile. "That it does, son, that it does." Inside, Tessa greeted Jeremiah warmly, her engagement ring catching the lamplight as she took his coat. The simple diamond had cost Isaac most of his savings from the Blackwater Boys' bounty, but the joy in her eyes when he'd proposed made it more than worthwhile. As they settled in for dinner, Isaac found himself studying Tessa's face across the table. Her honey-colored hair gleamed in the warm light, and her blue eyes sparkled as she engaged Jeremiah in conversation about his travels since they'd parted ways. In her, Isaac had found not just love, but a home, a concept he'd thought forever lost to him. The frontier was still harsh, still dangerous, but he no longer faced it alone. And in that companionship, he had discovered a strength greater than any he'd known as a solitary hunter. When Jeremiah retired to the spare room for the night, Isaac and Tessa stood together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the clear winter sky. "Happy?" she asked, leaning into his side. "More than I ever thought possible," he answered truthfully. You've given me back something I thought was gone forever. What's that? A future worth fighting for, Isaac said simply. A reason to come home. Tessa turned in his arms, her face upturned to his. We build it together now, day by day, brick by brick. That's what love is on the frontier. As their lips met under the vast Texas sky, Isaac knew with absolute certainty that his father had been wrong. The frontier wasn't just a place of hardship and solitary survival. It was also a place where unexpected love could bloom in the dust of the trail, where a man could chase outlaws and find himself instead, where the greatest strength wasn't in standing alone, but in choosing to stand together. In Tessa's arms, Isaac Xavier had finally found his true home.